Hey everyone, happy Thursday. Go USA for the big win last night. Now we move on. Hopefully, we continue to move on. It would be fantastic if the US soccer team could win on home turf. That would be absolutely amazing. But I don't want to talk about that today. I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about war um, and kind of the differences between kind of what's happening now and kind of the PTSD that we were given by past wars. Um, and I also just want to look at it from a realistic perspective. Um, I'll start with this. Uh, Trump going into this particular election cycle, obviously one of the key phrases he used quite often was new wars. And clearly, um, there is Iran right now. But I do think Iran is fundamentally different. Um, and I will also say this: when we think of wars, generally speaking, we're thinking about thousands of Americans dying, boots on the ground, um, long drawn out confrontations um, that really serve no greater purpose, or at least they outlast their intended purpose. I grew up with Iraq War or Desert Storm, and then the Iraq War, followed by the Afghanistan, or actually, I think it was Afghanistan, then Iraq. Um, Weapons of mass destruction turned out to be a lie. Um, but long drawn out conflict in Iraq, in Afghanistan, thousands of American soldiers died. Um, and there was clearly no purpose for that war. Now, I look at the current Iran war, and I can see about seven different reasons as to why we're there. Some of them are the ones that they talk about out loud. Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Obviously, that's true. Um, you know, I think change of leadership there is clearly needed. And so I look at it from that perspective and I'm like, makes sense. I also look at it from the perspective of like, in my opinion, is more of it's kind of killing two birds with one stone. While on one hand, we're saying publicly that this is about weapons of mass destruction within Iran and them not having a nuclear weapon and effectively ending their nuclear ambitions, it's also simultaneously hurting China. And you can see that also through the moves within Venezuela as well that led up to the bombing campaign within Iran. And most of the conjecture around the Iran war um, has been this constant like talk of, oh, boots are going to be on the ground, boots are going to be on the ground, boots are going to be on the ground. Um, that has yet to come to fruition. Even leading up to the renewed talks with Iran, the same day, sites like Breaking Points and others were putting out, videos talking about boots on the ground. America's going to put boots on the ground, and we're going to go, full invasion. Meanwhile, literally that video comes out and simultaneously all of the major news networks or news agencies are publishing US heading to Qatar for renewed talks initiated by Iran after we did all of the bombing um, there. And side note, interesting to see who has been killed in Iran within their leadership as of late. It hasn't been by the US. Um, it seems to be that the Kurds have made their way in, but also in order for these negotiations to work, And the reason why we did the bombing last week was because there are separate factions within Iran that don't want a deal done, and they're within the IRGC. And so the only way that the people negotiating on behalf of Iran can get the deal to move forward is to remove these people. And so I just find it interesting from that perspective. But to the point, the Iran war is fundamentally different in the way that it's being executed, um, and kind of the overall, just the overall atmosphere around it, right? Like, I remember um, yeah, people that I knew were getting called up. This is when I was a kid, but adults were getting called up for the Desert Storm invasion. These are people that had just gotten out of the Marine Corps, and they were like, "Yes, I'm done," and then they were on reserves, and they're getting called up. That one lasted no time, but then you had the second Iraq War, um, and led by Bush Jr., and that one just kind of went on and on and on and on and on. Then it had Afghanistan in there, and Trump's first term, it was great because the intent was we're pulling out of Iraq, we're pulling out of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Trump didn't win the 2020 election. It was leading up to the exit of Afghanistan. Biden decided he wanted to continue it, but doesn't seem like the plan they put together was as good or anywhere close to the plan that Trump would have put together. You had 13 service members die. You left a bunch of equipment. And there is some debate around leaving equipment, leaving dogs, which, by the way, the military views as equipment. Um, and so the way in which we exited was clearly going to be different from the Trump administration than the Biden administration, but the Biden administration was in, and whatever. And then we got out of that war. Interestingly enough, that war ends, and then immediately, kind of, the Ukraine war kicks off, and continues to go on, and that is a war. Iran or Iraq was a war. Afghanistan was a war. You had boots on the ground. You had us taking sections, coordinating off, creating green zones. Um, that's a war. What's happening in Iran is being framed as a war, but it's really a bombing campaign. I don't know if you're in the like, anytime we drop bombs, it's a war camp. Then yes, it's a war. But it is fundamentally different than anything that we've seen in our lifetime. And it's also interesting that simultaneously we're leveraging our military to get a deal done with Iran while also screwing China, while also screwing Russia. Um, it's just interesting from that perspective. But on to the next part, like, there's a belief that war can be, or using the military, I'll just say that more broadly, that there is no need to use the military. Um, and that is just not true. And as you pull back your military spending, training, equipment, as you focus less on that, you ultimately create a vulnerability. And this vulnerability is obvious to anybody who looks at, say, um, any European country now that doesn't really have their own military because they've relied on the US as their defense, or they've relied on NATO. And you can even look at NATO. Um, I would say they have some of the latest equipment, but they're not great. If a war really broke out in Europe, could NATO actually defend it? Like, probably not. Um, and so the US is the one that needs the strong military. And the military is mostly there, honestly, for trade, um, and to enforce trade. Since we are the superpower, we have the ability to do that. So, this notion that, like, a person, let's say Tucker Carlson is saying this, We don't need to go to war, or I don't believe in war. The second he got into office, I can guarantee you that the military is going to be used to do something. And that at worst case or at best case scenario, it would be like a Trump style military action where you're leveraging strategic assets to drop bombs, get in, get out, not boots on the ground. Like, that is just reality. And anybody who thinks that a president can go in and not do any of that stuff, and we will maintain our dominance, is lying to themselves. I mean, there are reasons to not do Iraq. There are reasons to not have done Afghanistan. Um, there are a ton of reasons why maybe Vietnam probably wasn't a great idea, but the reality is even if those things hadn't have happened, there would have been some military intervention somewhere, because that's just what happens when you become complacent. Other countries see that as a weakness and then move forward with whatever they want to do. And you can see this in areas that the US hasn't focused on. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that we should be getting involved in other countries' issues, unless it absolutely directly ties to the interests of the US, whether it's resources or this, that, and the other. That's just me. You can say that's a cold way to look at it, but we're not here to just try to solve everybody else's problems. Those problems need to be strategic, and we need to have a way that doesn't overexpose the U.S. when we do go and do those things. And again, I look at the Iran situation, and that's in my like I don't agree that with the war in general. I do understand kind of the implications and how it directly ties to some broader interest for the U.S. But again, like, you know, that can make sense, but like just going into a random country and doing that stuff like doesn't make much sense. But again, when we take a step back and we present like we are disengaging, Ukraine happens, right? There's a reason why Ukraine wasn't invaded under Trump, because there was an actual threat of retaliation, or retaliation of some sort, whether it was military, whether it was through sanctions, strategic sanctions, or whether it was through other means. There was a fear to invade. And that's why it didn't happen literally until Biden went into office. And especially, given Afghanistan. And so while these people like Tucker Carlson and, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Joe Kent and whatever will go out and say, "Oh, I would never do this. I would never use our military. I would never do this, that, and the other in regards to dropping bombs or leveraging the military." They're lying. They are absolutely lying. And they're going to have to do it. There's going to be a situation that arises which forces them to have to use the military. And generally speaking, if they refuse to do it, that exacerbates the situation. And then you have other countries or other areas that will start to blow up because the US has made it known that they are not going to engage. And so, again, we can all have this, hope that war is never needed, and that the military is never needed. But as long as we're on top, we can have those views. Um, but as soon as we get displaced as a superpower, by the way, the only way that happens is through war. And inevitably, there may be war between the US and China as we get closer to that actual power struggle or that power shift. potential power shift. Um, again, it's inevitable. We can hope, and we can have leaders who are more strategic about how they leverage military assets and the might of the US military. I trust, in this case, in the Trump administration and the people that are there to not send boots on the ground, which they have not to date, to do strategic strikes, to leverage our military might and intelligence to strategically approach things. I mean, the Maduro raid is a great example of that, leveraging techniques, technology, and just our sheer power to pull a president out of the country that, by the way, had a warrant for his arrest by the Biden administration. um, again, like strategic. It is unfortunate in the opening of the Iran war that one of our bases was hit, but looking at the broader picture, like this has been pretty successful so far from just a casualty perspective and the way it's been approached. There hasn't been this knee-jerk reaction to load up all of our soldiers and put them on the ground. There has been the threat of bringing all of our soldiers onto ships, making it publicly known so that Iran knows, hey, we might do this. Just the threat, right? After the bombing campaign and our history was able to get them to the table. Again, strategically, great move. Move a bunch of assets into the theater, hammer them from the air. I'm totally okay with that. Again, generally speaking, I never want war to happen or never want any of this conflict to happen. But inevitably, it's going to happen. And if it's going to happen, I want it to happen under this administration and not say, I would even use like a Marco Rubio, for instance, who comes from kind of the old mindset of more Bush doctrine and like the Clinton doctrine, which is like sending in troops and then having a long stay and then, having the military industrial complex just continue to grow and benefit off of the war and then continue to lobby to continue the war. This is much different. We have companies like Anduril, and I mean, we have so many new AI based companies and drone based companies that are reducing the overall cost. It's actually kind of amazing. But at any rate, to end it, I don't agree with war. It is disappointing that the No New Wars President Trump has this bombing campaign with Iran. I will say this is fundamentally different than any war in our lifetime. And I'm going to use it in the term of war. There are no boots on the ground. We're literally lobbing missiles into strategic locations into Iran and then forcing them to the table. No boots on the ground again. While that is disappointing, I cannot think of a better administration to end the Iranian regime in the most strategic way possible, leveraging no boots on the ground and leveraging the threat of the US military might, and while also screwing China and Russia. But at any rate, you can let me know what you think in the comments section below, because I'm sure a bunch of people are going to have a lot to say about this one. But as always, keep believing that the best is still ahead for America. Peace out.